Welcome to the Crafty Mini. For this Halloween episode, I've unfortunately lost the footage. So instead I've written a little story, which you're going to hear now, with the final project completed. If I do manage to get that original footage restored, I'll pop it back up into the playlist, so you can see how I actually painted it all. But thank you very much for listening. Here comes the story of Old Man Wilkins' pumpkin. And happy Halloween, and we'll see you on the next season and the intermediary videos we've got coming. Thank you very much.
It was a typical autumnal day in the small, rural village of Oakwood. The leaves were changing colors, the air was crisp, and the villagers were busy preparing for the upcoming Halloween celebration. The main attraction of the holiday was the giant pumpkin grown by the village's oldest resident, Old Man Wilkins. Every year Wilkins grew the biggest pumpkin in the village, and the villagers would use it to carve a giant jack-o'-lantern. This year, Wilkins' pumpkin was bigger and more perfect than ever before. Everyone in the village was excited to carve it and display it for all to see. Unknown to the villagers, Wilkins had sprinkled his special concoction of herbs and spices on the pumpkin, giving it a life of its own. He had been feeding it rats, some small animals he had trapped in the local woods, as the pumpkin demanded more and more blood. Wilkins wanted this to be the biggest pumpkin he had ever grown, not knowing this would be his and the village's downfall. On the night of the Halloween celebration, the giant pumpkin came to life. It rolled down the street, crushing everything in its path. The villagers were terrified, but the pumpkin seemed to have a single purpose. Growing thick-rooted legs and vine-like arms, the pumpkin face split into a terrifying face and began grabbing the villagers and eating them. Some hid in the small wooden buildings, but it was folly. Making its way down the old paths, the giant pumpkin gorged itself on people, livestock, and pets. As it did, it grew bigger and bigger until it was as large as a house. As the survivors tried to flee towards the nearby wood, they were attacked by roots that sprang up from the ground, skewering them and herding them back towards the center of the village. Before them was a great and horrific pumpkin larger than any house in the village, and around its base were smaller pumpkins around the size of a person. Each of them had a face seemingly carved on them, each looking eerily similar to the villagers that had died. The giant pumpkin was turning the people into jack-o'-lanterns of its own in the middle of this field of lights. Old Man Wilkins stood laughing, manically pointing at them. He had gone completely mad. Finally, one brave villager stepped forward and ran towards old Wilkins and tackled him towards the mouth of the giant pumpkin. Both of them fighting and shouting at each other, they fell into the pumpkin's mouth. Suddenly, the green light that lit up from within the pumpkin went out. It seemed to wilt slightly, as if the pumpkin had begun to rot after being carved, and it slowly began to shrink until it was the size of an ordinary pumpkin once more. From that day forward, the villagers of Oakwood vowed to never carve another pumpkin, and to keep the secret of the Old Man Wilkins and his pumpkin monster to themselves. Even today in Oakwood, Halloween is still celebrated, but not a single pumpkin is carved.